The moment the script dies, that's when television actually begins. 2 chairs, 2 people, 1,000,000 watts of studio lighting. Everything looks controlled, professional, inevitable. But live TV has a secret. It can't be fully tamed. One unexpected question, one pause that stretches a beat too long, and suddenly, the performance cracks open. What spills out isn't television. It's truth. And the entire world leans in at exactly the same moment. That is exactly the kind of moment we are going to walk through tonight. It started with a photograph. Just one photograph, posted to social media on a February morning in 2026. In that image, a leather-bound Bible with the American flag embossed on the cover sat in the hands of one of the most recognizable women in music history. Across its front page, a signature. The signature of the 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And the woman holding it was not a politician. She was not a conservative pundit. She was not a pastor or a religious commentator. She was Nicki Minaj, the Trinidadian-born rapper who had spent 2 decades building an empire in hip-hop. The woman who had sold over 100 million records worldwide. The artist who had shattered Billboard records, dominated charts, and become a cultural institution in American pop music. She was holding a Trump Bible, calling it one of the most meaningful gifts she had ever received, and the internet was not ready for it. Within hours, her post became the most discussed entertainment story in the country. Supporters celebrated it. Critics dissected it. Fans felt blindsided by it. And somewhere in a Midtown Manhattan studio, a late-night host with round glasses, a sharp wit, and absolutely no filter when it comes to presidential politics took note of every single word she had written. Stephen Colbert has hosted The Late Show on CBS since 2015. He built his reputation over 2 decades as a political satirist, first on The Daily Show, then as the host of The Colbert Report, and ultimately as the face of one of America's most watched late-night programs. He is not a journalist in the traditional sense. But make no mistake, he asks the kinds of questions that journalists sometimes will not. He has sat across from presidents, senators, Supreme Court justices, Hollywood legends, and global icons. He is charming, disarming, deeply informed, and when the moment calls for it, ruthlessly precise. He is the kind of host who will smile at you while sharpening a blade beneath the desk. So when Nicki Minaj appeared on The Late Show, the conversation was never going to stay surface level. Not with the Trump Bible story still echoing across social media. Not with her recent public statements about her admiration for the current administration. Not with a live studio audience watching and cameras broadcasting in real time. Subscribe to Prime Talk, hit the like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because what you are about to hear is one of those late-night interviews that will be studied, replayed, and referenced for years. The question that changed everything did not arrive at the beginning. It came after the laughter. After the small talk, after the comfortable portion of the interview where both parties had settled into their rhythm and the audience had warmed to the energy in the room. Colbert had been patient. He had been charming. He had let her speak freely, let her laugh, let her promote her work, let her sit in the glow of being a celebrated guest on one of the most storied stages in late-night television. And then, with the practiced ease of a man who has been doing this for decades, he turned the page. He picked up the thread of the Bible story. Calmly, almost casually, as if he were asking about the weather. And the room changed. What happened next was not a screaming match. It was not a tabloid spectacle. It was not manufactured drama. It was something far more uncomfortable. It was the kind of moment where 2 intelligent people, each with deeply held convictions, each with a platform that reaches millions, sat across from each other in real time and were forced to be honest about what they actually believed. No teleprompter. No publicist whispering in an earpiece. No time delay. Just the cameras, the lights, the audience, and the truth. By the time the segment ended, the clip had already begun spreading across every social media platform on Earth. But to understand why this moment hit the way it did, why it landed with the cultural weight that it did, you have to understand who these 2 people are. Not just their careers, not just their public images, but the full picture. The history, the politics, the faith, the friction. You have to understand what Nicki Minaj has been saying publicly over the past year, and you have to understand what Stephen Colbert has spent his entire career standing for. Because this was not simply a celebrity interview that went sideways. This was a collision of 2 worlds that have almost nothing in common. And it happened live, unedited, and on one of the biggest stages in American television. Stay with us. because this story is far more layered than the headlines made it seem. To understand the weight of what happened on that stage, you have to go back further than the photograph. You have to go back to a version of Nicki Minaj that the public did not always associate with presidential politics or leather-bound Bibles signed by a sitting president. Onika Tanya Mirage was born in St. James, Trinidad, and moved to Queens, New York, at the age of 5. She grew up in South Jamaica, one of the most underserved neighborhoods in New York City, in a household shaped by financial instability and family trauma. She has spoken openly, in interviews and in her music, about the violence in her childhood home, about the chaos, about the hunger to escape through creativity. She began rapping as a teenager, building her reputation through the underground New York mixtape circuit in the mid-2000s, when mixtapes were still being distributed physically, handed off on street corners and copied from hard drives. She was raw, aggressive, technically precise, and ambitious in a way that made people stop and pay attention. By 2010, when her debut album Pink Friday was released through Young Money Entertainment and Cash Money Records, the conversation around her had already shifted from underground artist to mainstream phenomenon. She was nominated for Grammy Awards before most people had adjusted to her name. She collaborated with Drake, Lil Wayne, Beyoncé, Kanye West, Eminem, and a roster of artists that represented every corner of popular music. She became the first female rapper to have 7 singles simultaneously charting on the Billboard Hot 100. She broke records that had stood for decades. She was, by every measurable standard, one of the most commercially successful and culturally dominant musical figures of her generation. But her public persona was never simple. She was opinionated, outspoken, and unafraid to use her platform to weigh in on politics, religion, race, and culture. For years, her political leanings were not always clearly defined. She had previously expressed skepticism about the COVID-19 vaccine in a way that drew national attention and criticism from public health officials, including Dr. Anthony Fauci. She had clashed publicly with other artists, with critics, with media figures. She was someone who never shied away from a confrontation, whether it served her commercially or not. Then came the 2024 election cycle, and with it a shift in Nicki Minaj's public positioning that surprised many who had followed her career closely. She began expressing open admiration for Donald Trump. She celebrated his return to power. She spoke about his policies in ways that aligned her, at least publicly, with a political movement that has historically had a complicated and often antagonistic relationship with hip-hop culture. For some fans, it felt like a betrayal. For others, it was a reflection of evolving personal beliefs. For cultural commentators, it was a fascinating and deeply complex development that raised questions about the relationship between celebrity, identity, and political alignment. And then came the Bible. When Nicki Minaj posted that photograph in February 2026, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. The signed, leather-bound God Bless the USA Bible, retailing at approximately $1,000 on the official website, was not simply a gift. In the context of American political culture, that Bible carried enormous symbolic weight. It had become one of the most visible commercial products associated with Donald Trump's brand of Christian nationalism. Critics argued that selling Bibles bearing a president's signature was an unprecedented blending of political identity with sacred religious text. Supporters saw it as a celebration of faith, patriotism, and a president they believed was fighting for their values. For Nicki Minaj to publicly call it one of the most meaningful gifts she had ever received was not simply a personal statement. It was a declaration. It was a positioning. It was a signal that she was not quietly aligning herself with conservative politics behind closed doors, but doing so loudly, publicly, and without apology. The cultural shockwaves were enormous. Commentary flooded in from every direction. Other artists were asked about it in interviews. Political figures weighed in. Religious scholars were quoted in news articles. And the question that everyone seemed to be asking, whether they were fans, critics, or casual observers, was the same question that hung in the air when she sat down across from Stephen Colbert. What exactly do you believe? And why? Colbert, for his part, had been tracking this story with the same focused attention he brings to every political or cultural development that passes across his desk. He is not a man who grandstands for its own sake. He is not someone who ambushes guests purely for sport. But he is also someone who has built his entire career on the belief that ideas matter, that public statements carry responsibility, and that the intersection of celebrity and political power is one of the most important stories in modern American life. He has a deep and genuine Catholic faith, which makes the use of a signed presidential Bible not simply a political question for him, but something that cuts closer to a personal and theological one. The stage was set. The tension was real, and neither of them could feel how close to the edge they were standing. Not yet. The night the interview aired, the Late Show studio on the west side of Manhattan was filled with the usual energy. The audience had been seated, warmed up by a comedian warming the room, briefed on the evening's guests, and primed for what was being billed as a wide-ranging conversation about music, culture, and the current state of the entertainment industry. There was no official warning of what was coming. No promotional teaser had hinted at confrontation. This was supposed to be a celebration of an artist at the height of her powers, talking about her legacy, her music, her family, and her life. Nicki Minaj walked out to one of the loudest studio ovations of the season. She was dressed in a white ensemble, striking and deliberate in its presentation, her presence filling the space the way it always does, with an unmistakable gravity that draws every eye in a room. She embraced Colbert at the desk, the two exchanging the kind of warm pleasantries that frame the beginning of every interview. The band had just closed out her entrance music, and the crowd was still buzzing. Colbert opened with music. He asked about her discography, about the evolution of her sound, about her influence on a generation of female rappers who had come after her and openly cited her as the reason they believed a woman could dominate the rap game without compromise. She answered with the effortless confidence of someone who has been doing this for 20 years, someone who knows precisely who she is and has no anxiety about being asked to explain herself. It was warm. It was entertaining. It was exactly the kind of segment that fills the first half of a late-night desk interview and keeps the audience laughing and engaged. Then Colbert shifted. He set down the note card he had been holding. Not dramatically. Not with a theatrical gesture. He simply placed it on the desk and looked at her with a calm, measured expression that his longtime viewers would recognize immediately. It was the look he deploys when the conversation is about to move from entertainment into something more substantive. He said, and these are words that were heard live by millions of viewers, "I want to ask you about something you shared publicly. The Bible. The Trump Bible. You called it one of the most meaningful gifts you have ever received. I want to understand that. Help me understand that." The studio went quiet in a way that live studio audiences almost never do. Not completely silent, but the kind of quiet where the ambient energy shifts, where people stop shifting in their seats and collectively hold their breath. Nicki Minaj looked at him. She did not look away. She did not smile to deflect. She met the question with a directness that, in retrospect, was the first indication that this exchange was not going to follow a predictable path. She said that her faith was real, that it had always been real, that the Bible itself was a sacred text, and that receiving a copy of it, regardless of who had signed it, felt like a reminder of something she had always believed in. She was measured. She was articulate. She spoke with conviction. Colbert listened without interruption. He nodded. And then, without raising his voice, he pressed further. He said that he also had faith, that he took the Bible seriously, and that was precisely why he wanted to ask her a question that was genuine and not political. He asked whether she thought there was something complicated, or even troubling, about a sitting president placing his signature on a sacred religious text and selling it for $1,000. The silence that followed was exactly 4 seconds long. 4 seconds on live television is an eternity. Her eyes moved. Her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. She glanced once toward the audience, as if gauging the room. And when she spoke again, the tone had changed. She was not rattled, but she was no longer completely comfortable. And in that discomfort, something honest emerged. Stay with Prime Talk, because the 4 seconds that followed that question, and everything that happened next in that studio, are exactly what we are going to break down when we come back. The 4 seconds ended. And what came next was the kind of television moment that people in the industry spend their entire careers chasing and almost never catch. Nicki Minaj spoke. She said that she was not going to sit there and let someone reduce her faith to a political narrative. She said that she had grown up poor, that she had fought for everything she had, that she had leaned on her belief in God during some of the darkest moments of her life, and that no interview on no television show was going to tell her what her faith was allowed to look like. Her voice was controlled, but the temperature beneath it was unmistakable. She was not yelling. She did not need to. The audience stirred. A few people applauded. A few others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Colbert held his position. He did not retreat, but he also did not escalate. He responded by saying that he respected everything she had just said, that he was not questioning her personal faith at all, and that he understood the difference between the sacred and the political. But he returned to the central question, gently and precisely. He said the question was not about her faith. It was about whether the commercial packaging of scripture for political purposes was something she thought deserved to be examined, regardless of who was doing it. The room was tighter now. The warmth from the first half of the interview had not evaporated entirely, but it had been replaced by something more charged, more electric, more real. The cameras stayed on both of them. Neither flinched. Nicki Minaj paused again. This time the pause was shorter, but no less meaningful. And then she said something that no one on that production team had anticipated. She said that maybe the same question should be asked of every institution that had ever used religion to control people, sell products, and build empires. She said the music industry did it. Hollywood did it. Politicians on both sides of the aisle did it. And she was not going to single out one president for something that American culture had been doing for centuries. It was a deflection. It was also, in its own way, a genuinely sharp point. Colbert leaned back slightly. He smiled. Not the warm, welcoming smile from the top of the show, but a smaller, more contemplative smile. He said, "Fair enough." And then he said one more thing that landed like a quiet detonation in the studio. He said that the difference, in his view, was that most of those institutions were not also running the country. The audience reacted. Not with laughter. Not with applause. With a wave of sound that was somewhere between acknowledgement and unease. It was the sound of people witnessing something real. Nicki Minaj looked at him for a moment. She did not respond to that last line. She straightened in her seat. The segment moved forward. The cameras kept rolling. And anyone watching at home understood, without being told, that something significant had just happened. By the time the episode ended and the Late Show credits rolled, the clip was already being shared on social media by millions of people. Not just fans of Nicki Minaj. Not just regular viewers of The Late Show. By political commentators, cultural journalists, religious scholars, and everyday people who did not normally pay close attention to late-night television but found themselves watching that 4-minute exchange on their phones in the middle of the night, replaying it, talking about it, and trying to make sense of what it meant. The immediate media reaction was significant. Major entertainment outlets ran headlines within the hour. Cable news networks began airing the clip before the evening was even over. Opinion columnists who had been watching the Trump Bible story since it broke in February found themselves with a new and vivid reference point. What had been a social media story about a celebrity and a photograph had now become a live television event with layers that would take days to fully unpack. For Nicki Minaj, the aftermath was complex. Her supporters rallied around her. On social media, fans praised her for standing her ground, for refusing to be lectured, for defending her faith with clarity and force. Critics argued that she had not actually answered the central question, that the deflection to broader cultural hypocrisy, while clever, had sidestepped the specific and pointed issue Colbert had raised. The debate was loud, sustained, and genuinely substantive, which is rarer than most people realize in the age of social media outrage cycles. For Colbert, the segment was a reminder of why live television still matters in an era of streaming, pre-recorded content, and algorithm-driven media. He had done what the best interviewers do. He had asked the question that needed to be asked, pursued it with respect and precision, and allowed the subject to speak for herself. He had not editorialized excessively. He had not turned the segment into a political rally. He had simply held the line with professionalism, and in doing so, had created a moment that the entire country was talking about. The deeper cultural significance of this confrontation is not something that can be reduced to a simple verdict. There is no clean winner or loser in this kind of exchange. What the moment revealed was something more important than a debate outcome. It revealed the enormous tension that exists in contemporary America between celebrity, faith, politics, and identity. It revealed that the alliance between hip-hop culture and mega politics is not a simple story, that it contains contradictions, genuine conviction, personal history, and complexity that the headlines rarely have room to capture. It revealed that Nicki Minaj, whatever one thinks of her political alignment, is not a passive participant in any narrative. She is someone who has thought about what she believes and will defend it in front of any audience. And it revealed that Stephen Colbert, behind the jokes and the late-night wit, is someone who takes ideas seriously, who believes that public figures have a responsibility to engage with the consequences of their public statements, who will ask the hard question even when the camera is rolling and the room goes quiet. That 4-second pause on live television was not a mistake or a stumble. It was a human moment. The kind of moment that reminds us, in a media landscape that is increasingly manufactured and controlled, that live television still has the power to catch people off guard in ways that are illuminating rather than merely sensational. This moment will be studied, not because it was the loudest confrontation in late-night history, but because it was one of the most honest. Two people, with fundamentally different worldviews, sitting across from each other in public, refusing to pretend that the tensions between them did not exist. That is rare. That is valuable. And that is why we are still talking about it. If this video gave you something to think about, we would love to hear your perspective in the comments below. What did you take away from that exchange? Where do you think the line is between faith and politics in public life? This conversation is far from over, and the Prime Talk community is exactly where it needs to happen. Subscribe to Prime Talk if you are not already part of the family. Give this video a like if you found it worthwhile. Share it with someone who would appreciate the depth of the story. And stay close, because there is always another moment in live television waiting to tell us something true about who we are.